We're heading into week 11 of the fantasy football season, which means for most of you, you've got 4 weeks left for your regular season and probably only a few weeks left, probably one or two for your trade deadline. So it's time to make moves now.
Hike!
So, Joe, who is your first trade target?
Yeah, I think that's good advice, Steve. Now is the time to really make some last moves here, prepare your team to make your playoff push if you're, competing. But the first player I'm going to talk about is I'd be buying Joshua Dobbs. We saw him get kind of thrown in last week against the Falcons unexpectedly, but performed pretty well. But then, this week, actually facing a tough Saints defense, didn't really know what to expect out of him. But he ended up having 260 yards passing, 67 completion percentage, a touchdown, and was also productive in the rushing game too, with 44 yards rushing and another rushing touchdown. So I feel like this is a guy that's getting decent fantasy points for his rushing and passing ability. If you had Kirk Cousins looking to replace him, or if you're streaming quarterbacks or in a super flex league, I think you could do a lot worse than Josh Dobbs. And his upcoming schedule isn't bad either. He's got the Broncos this upcoming week in week 11. Then he's got the Bears, then the Raiders, Bengals, Lions, Packers, and then, for most of us, that would be the last week. So there's not too many concerning defenses there. He's got some good matchups that I feel like he could exploit. As far as people I'd be willing to trade for him at this point, I think Deshaun Watson's been pretty disappointing. I'd be willing to trade him. Possibly a guy like Geno Smith. I know he had a good week this week, but I don't think you're going to, bank on those type of performances. And, I think, too, I might be willing to go as high as a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who just hasn't been performing lately. I just feel like, Joshua Dobbs, he showed flashes in Arizona, but now he's in a much more talented offense, and the Minnesota Vikings seems to be grasping what Kevin O'Connell wants. Justin Jefferson could be coming back here as well, pairing that with Addison and Hawkinson, which he's already been throwing to as well. So I think he's a pretty good option moving forward.
Well said, Joe. I was just gonna add in there about got Justin Jefferson coming back at some point from injured reserve, and that could arguably the best receiver in football. Now he has him to work with as well, so that's even more reasons why you'd like Joshua Dobbs. And for all those players you mentioned, I think it could be a situation where you're talking about Josh Dobbs plus, right? You're not gonna, you wouldn't have, unless, someone's a little kooky in your league, you're not going to, they're not going to be like, you offer Josh Dobbs for Trevor Lawrence and like, are you kidding me? You want Josh Dobbs? Like, I don't know. I don't think he's gotten to that point where we have to worry about that, but who knows? Maybe people are that recency bias and, but I'm with you. I mean, Trevor Lawrence was a guy who was, drafted probably pretty high in most leagues. You and I both were expecting a huge jump from him. Really hasn't happened. So I like that call out for you.
Yeah, I know. As you mentioned, we were both expecting big things with Doug Peterson's, second year in that system, but just hasn't happened. It's been pretty disappointing.
Yeah, it really has, and I think we've seen enough where it's time to move on and cut your losses. And if he ends up bouncing back, so be it. But I just haven't seen enough promise to make me think he's going to be doing it on a week in, week out basis.
Yeah, I agree.
So my first trade target is wide receiver DK Metcalf. He's having a pretty disappointing season on the year. He's currently, I believe, wide receiver like 46 territory in most leagues in a PPR setting. But he had a good week. Not a great week, but a solid week against the Commanders. Was targeted 12 times, had 7 catches for 98 yards receiving. This is still, he did not get over 100 yards, so he's only been able to go over 100 yards once this season, and no touchdowns. But I gotta tell you, really love his schedule down the stretch. I mean, it's really hard to beat. So this is the type of situation where it's like DK Metcalf, we know that he has been a consistent wide receiver 1-2 territory for his career from what we expected. He's been a guy who really season in, season out, whether it was Russell Wilson or Geno Smith, really didn't miss a beat. And so for me, right now, his touchdown regression is pretty significant, only having 2 touchdowns on the year. And like I said, his schedule, he's got San Francisco twice, who's been susceptible to the receiving game. He also has the Eagles in Week 15, who, they've been a sieve. Titans in Week 16, who also have been very bad. And then Pittsburgh in the championship game. So, this is the type of player I like to buy. This is, he didn't go crazy. So I think, if the owner, if they're not looking ahead, they're probably more than willing to trade DK Metcalf. If you like Tyler Lockett better, I also say Tyler Lockett falls into this. I think both of them are going to benefit from this schedule down the stretch. I just personally like DK better because of his big playability. I know he may lose me some games, but I also know he single-handedly could win me games. And those are the type of players I like having on my roster, especially in the playoffs when sometimes it's an absolute, who knows what's going to happen, The playoffs is just like any other week when it comes to fantasy football. Just what happens is the later week. So, I like to have a guy who's an absolute game breaker on my team.
Yeah, it makes sense. But it doesn't concern you at all? Like with this matchup against Commanders, it's hard to get a better matchup than that. They have such a bad secondary that he didn't get 100 yards or get a touchdown.
No, I'm not concerned. I mean, he was still heavily involved. If he had him, it was still a good day, So to me, I'm not really that concerned about that. I mean, he's going to end up being around a wide receiver 1 on the week. So, if you have him, you're in good shape. And based on the trade value chart, based on Draft Sharks, I mean, his value is really suppressed right now. So, I mean, I would trade away guys like Zay Flowers, Chris Godwin, Marquise Brown, Terry McLaurin, Garrett Wilson. There are a lot of names there. Michael Pittman. I'd be willing to trade all of them away to acquire a guy like DK Metcalf. So I think there's a lot of wiggle room to work with to get a guy like DK.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, you and I always disagree on this. I'd take Lockett all day. He just seems, he actually got the touchdown today as well. That's the one thing that's surprising. As big as DK is, he doesn't seem to really be a factor in the red zone. Like it's Kenneth Walker getting the rushing touchdowns, or a lot of times we're seeing Tyler Lockett or some other guy, get these get the touchdowns.
Would you agree with me, I guess, on the logic though with Lockett then? If it wasn't Metcalf, you liked the thought.
Yeah. I mean, the schedule is that's undeniable. I do like the thought. Yeah, just a fundamental disagreement. You like the big flashy guys that can get you that big ceiling if they get those big plays. I'd rather take the more consistent target guys like a Tyler Lockett.
So are you enjoying this video so far? Well, if you are, show your support to our new channel by hitting the subscribe button and liking this video. We'll be creating videos all NFL season long, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So going over to your next trade target, who is it, Joe?
Yeah, my next trade target is going to be Tank Dell. I know he's had a couple of good weeks here, so you might have to, spend up to get him. Although he didn't have a crazy game today against the Bengals. He had 6 receptions for 56 yards, did get a touchdown. But, nothing like his performance against the Buccaneers where he had 2 touchdowns, 114 yards on 6 receptions. But this is back-to-back weeks. Seeing solid production out of him. And I know this past game wasn't with Nico Collins on the field, but his performance against the Bucs, had Nico Collins out there. So that doesn't really surprise me. He seems to be, at this point, like Stroud's number 1 go-to guy. And, with their upcoming schedule, they've got the Cardinals coming up this weekend, then the Jaguars, the Broncos. Jets is a tough matchup, but then after that, they got the Titans, Browns, and then the Titans again for your championship game, matchup. So I think he's an interesting guy to target. Looks like he should be the main focal point of the Texans receiving core going forward. And I would be one to trade, the likes of Calvin Ridley, Deontay Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins, George Pickens, even even a guy like Jacoby Myers, who's been pretty consistent, but looks like things could be different now with Aiden O'Connell there.
Yeah, here's another guy that, based on the trade value chart we're working off of, his value is extremely suppressed. After this week, he could see a bump, but he's not a flashy name by any means. Houston's really hot right now, so you are kind of buying in that buy high mode, right? If you wanted to buy him a few weeks ago, we always talk about it's better to do that, but doesn't mean just because he's in this territory it means like, oh well, you'd be foolish to do that, because he could continue on this pace and he could be. I don't think this would be a league winner for you. I mean, if he continues to do what he's been doing the past 2 weeks, it's probably pretty good, but. You can get rid of guys that maybe have a little bit more of a name to them. Even a guy I think of like a DeAndre Hopkins, right, or even a Calvin Ridley. They've got some name association to them, so people are like, "Oh, it's Calvin Ridley," even though he's been really bad. But you never know. Some people get caught up in that stuff, and the difference between Tank Dell's name versus Hopkins and Ridley's name. It could make the difference.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the name factors, as you mentioned, definitely carries a lot of weight, I feel like.
And there's no doubt he's Stroud's favorite target. So if Stroud continue to play this way, I think it's gonna work out really well.
Yeah, which, I mean, at this point, Stroud's really shown no signs of slowing down. I thought the Bengals on the road might be a tough matchup for him, but nope, he just kept going, and him, Noah Brown, and Tank Dell really have emerged and kept this thing rolling.
So my second trade target would be running back Rachaad White. This is a guy who I've been a big fan of heading into the season, and my main reason, why, is usage. To me, if he gets fed and he continues to get the carries and he gets the targets, then it's the type of running back I'm interested in. And the reality is he really has nobody else to contend with. And so as a result, I really like him going forward. I mean, the past 2 games, he's had 20 attempts. Now, he's inefficient, and I know that's why you don't like him. He's the exact example of what you hate in a running back and what I like in a running back. I mean, he is extremely inefficient. I do think there is a component of that offensive line is not very good. I mean, I remember watching him in the Bills game with him. He's had some spurts, where it's like, okay, when he gets in space, he can be dangerous. And he's a great receiver. He just has great hands. So I think he has the talent. I don't know. I would be curious if a Bucs fan would disagree on that. But this past week he had 20 attempts, 51 yards, 3 targets, 2 catches, 47 yards, and a touchdown. And one of the reasons why I like him is I just like the schedule ahead. He's got the Colts in Week 12. That's a great matchup. Panthers in Week 13. That's a fantastic matchup. Packers in Week 15. Solid matchup. We've got some division games with the Falcons and the Saints, which isn't the greatest. But then again, he's not a guy that you just have to purely rely based on the running game. He has that receiving prowess where he's able to. Baker has looked his way several times. Getting several targets and getting some receptions. So. I like him, and I got to be honest with you, really surprised how low he is on this chart. I would think that based on his usage, he'd be a lot better because, he's been an RB1 these past few weeks, and he's an RB1 on the season. So from my standpoint, I would be trading away the likes of Aaron Jones, Isaiah Pacheco. I would honestly, I know people might think I'm crazy, but I've been saying this from the beginning. I'd trade away Tony Pollard. I didn't think that Pollard was going to get the usage that people thought that he would, and he hasn't. They've used Rico Dowdle. I thought they were going to use the rookie out of Kansas State, but they haven't really used him as much. But it's just one of those things where I was really not thinking that Pollard would get the volume, and he hasn't. So, and I don't even think we might not even have to do a 1-to-1 situation there. It could be, Rachaad White plus for the name of Tony Pollard.
Yeah, definitely. Rachaad White, he's been surprising. I mean, like you said, he's been efficient in the run game. That was to be expected. But even, last year with Brady, like he didn't always do a lot after the catch. Like he was getting targets, but that was my one issue with him. Yes, he was getting the receptions, but it was like when he was getting them, he wasn't effective even after he was making the catch. But he's benefited from a couple of screen passes on the receiving game for nice long gains the past couple of weeks here. He definitely is interesting. You're not wrong. It's hard to find running backs these days that get at least 20 carries or touch the ball 20 times. So when you do, I mean, those guys are valuable. So as long as Rachaad White keeps getting touchdowns and is able to make a couple of bigger plays, he's going to be solid moving forward.
The whole reason you wanted Pollard is Rachaad White, and it just so happens that Rachaad White has outperformed Pollard. So to me, if you had all these reasons, like rationale, I mean, obviously he was better last year. Pollard was. He was very good. So, but all of the reasons why you thought Pollard would be good, Rachaad White is doing it right now. So to me, that seems like a trade that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I don't know if Rachaad White's doing it. I mean, he's got a couple of big weeks where he's had the big play, but if he doesn't have the big play, I don't know. You wanted Pollard because he's got that excitement factor, kind of like a Travis Etienne, where he can make the big plays, but Tony Pollard just simply hasn't been looking explosive at all. And, you and I talked about it today. Dowdle looks far more explosive and is making way better cuts than him. I don't know if, maybe that injury that he suffered last year was worse than people thought, or the road to recovery, or what's going on, but he definitely looks like he's not as fast and dynamic as he was a year ago.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So that is our week 11 trade targets. Hopefully, this advice can help you be able to acquire some of those guys to help you to make it to the playoffs and hopefully win your leagues. We'll be back next week to do some week 12 trade targets. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.